Today, we're going to cover, again, what the title says, the bylaws pertaining to the ECP process. Next week, we will cover more of the technology things from ECP, building off of things that we've learned from our tech launch earlier this fall, things that we have updated since then, and any key changes or key things that you'll need to keep in mind as you're going into this next certification cycle between the fall and spring semesters. Speaking in semesters because it's a little bit easier, but understanding quarter schools are very close to that as well. I'm a one-man team today, so I'll do my best to look into the chat for questions, but I will also save some time at the end to catch up on questions either in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself at the end and we can cover any questions that you may have. So the bylaw application of submission of an ECP certificate, it is the responsibility of the faculty athletic representative of each member institution to check the eligibility of each student prior to allowing the student to represent the institution in any manner, including scrimmages, intercollegiate contests, exhibitions, etc., against competitors not directly identified with the institution in any sport recognized by the NAIA. What is included in the ECP certificate is, of course, the official certificate itself, the certificate of clearance, which is the record of compliance for FERPA regulations to be kept on campus. I'm going to provide a little bit of an update on that piece next week as well. Transfer player eligibility statement, which is both embedded within the ECP technology system, also a paper form, and the outside competitive experience form, also embedded in the student's ECP profile. Timing of certification, essentially a certification must happen in each academic term your institution has, except for summer. So each team that competes in one term that carries over into the next term, you have to be certified for each academic term in which the students compete. And those, again, include the scrimmage time. So we do get questions sometimes from coaches that ask for clarity to say, do we need to do a certificate in the fall if we're just doing scrimmages? And the answer, of course, is yes, even if your main season is not until the spring. So for all terms during the regular academic year, students enrolled in the second or subsequent term may compete in between terms, beginning on the day following the close of the concluding term, provided the student meets all eligibility requirements for the upcoming term. So I'll dive into a little bit more on that piece because that is what we're definitely seeing right now as well. So in our bylaws, it used to be a 21-day window, now is referred to as the 30-day recertification window. Students who are eligible the last day of the term, as reported on the institution's official transcript or academic calendar, I should say, may retain eligibility until midnight of the 30th calendar day following the close of the term. This regulation does not apply to students who have completed 10 semesters or equivalent. Unfortunately, at the close of that term, the students have exhausted their eligibility immediately. So further, students who are discoverable to be ineligible by the institution through the official eligibility process or ECP process or by conference standards shall lose eligibility immediately upon such discovery. I'll cover that here a little bit as well. But in general, the 30-day recertification window was created to cater to those institutions where it might be a registrar or a records person, might be gone from December 6th all the way to January 3rd. And so we want to make sure that our institutions are not going to be hurt for those time periods in which people from campus may not be around to help certify student athletes. So the 30-day recertification is going to be contingent on the last day of the academic calendar, specific to the school's calendar, not necessarily the day when grades are due. It's going to be the last day of the calendar or the last day of the exam period or the exam week. So the 30 days to wait until we recertify. We'll cover some nuances here in a second. And just a quick reminder that violations of delinquent filing of all ECP certificates or leaving students off subsequent certificates will result in violations where coaches might be suspended for competition, forfeits, or further penalties. So we need to make sure that we're looking at this about the violations and admin errors and always keeping that in the back of our mind while we're going through the certification process. Okay, important FAQs that we get about certification. More common with this is the FAR or registrar. What if one of these individuals are unavailable to sign their certificate, especially now that we're moving into the Christmas and the holiday season and people are going to be traveling and doing different things? It's easier to advise for an athletics director can always sign for a coach, but the academic and athletic side of the house cannot mix. So an institution may use a substitute FAR or registrar to assist the certification process. The substitute signature should be coming from a supervisor of the current person that you're looking to substitute, i.e. a dean of students, institution's president, so on and so forth. Or you can name, we have this common as well, if the president is aware of this, because the president names FARs, the president can assign 2 FARs and have 2 FARs essentially on call for certifying or signing, and you can pick one, but also have a backup FAR if it's ever needed. Same for the registrar's office. The intent behind finding a substitute signer is to ensure that the person who's responsible for the information he or she is signing for understands the importance of the accuracy of the information and has the authority to be held accountable for any information submitted under his or her signature. And again, just a quick reminder, at no time can the athletic side of the house sign for the academic side of the house, meaning an athletics director may sign for a coach, but under no circumstances can an AD sign for an FAR or registrar. Doing so will result in penalties and possible conduct and ethics review. And I'll talk about this again next week, but just again, a reminder or something to think about. Best practice is possibly looking to name 2 FARs and 2 registrars, even if one is an assistant registrar, one is the head registrar. If your president and leadership are aware of the 2 signers and the signers have done the appropriate trainings, they can both be named in our ECP system so that they are able to sign at any point in time. Okay, next step. So we're going to go back to that ruling of 30 days from close of term. So I want to remind you of what close of term means. It is the date listed on the institutional catalog as the last day of term. If no such date is given, the end of the term shall be the last day of the final exam period for that term. So certification for the following academic term is required within 30 days of the end of this previous term. And then the big question we also get is, how is a student to be discovered to be ineligible? Or what does institution checks eligibility actually mean? This is a big question. So the official ECP process is the process that identifies whether a student is eligible to compete under NAIA regulations. A student is not considered officially ineligible until the process of certification and the evaluation of the previous term's institutional credits and grades are factored into ECP. So a student may continue to compete after the fall term, I should say, during the 30-day window until the official certification process is complete. So the intent behind this is a somewhat recent, in the past few years, of a bylaw amendment. Along the time of that 30 days, we get a lot of questions and pushback. And of course, I think coaches trying to needle different lines of how do you know when a student athlete is ineligible? Well, the official process to understand that, even if you get maybe some records of grades are coming in, you might get a record of a report coming through that a student might have failed a class. What does that mean? Well, you can do the ECP process with the understanding that at that point in time, if you discover a student athlete to be ineligible, they must immediately sit. They do not get the grace period of 30 days. However, our bylaws do allow for 30 days. And so if you wish to not engage into the process of certifying until the 29th day, in order to allow for the students to continue to compete, again, that's within the bylaws, and certainly you're available to do so. But that helps provide a little bit more kind of strict black and white guidance from our bylaws of when do you know if a student is ineligible to compete. Students establishing eligibility mid-year. Students who are ineligible in the previous term or a transfer student not identified at the institution during the prior term can be certified to play the day after the fall term ends. These students do not need to wait for the 30-day recertification period or the start of classes the following term to be eligible. If the rest of the team uses the 30-day recertification period, these mid-year eligible students must be certified for the upcoming term. So in this case, it could be the spring term. Mid-year eligibility requires certification under a winter or spring certificate effective the day after the official end of the fall term. One student can kick off the certification for the next term. So especially here, we're looking at the sport of basketball. If you have one student who's coming in and they are ready to go come the end of the fall term, that one student can kick off the certificate for the spring term, given that they meet all other spring requirements for eligibility. They have the eligible EC decision. They have been registered in classes and have that official transcript ready to go. So at the end of the fall term, that following day, you can kick off the spring certificate with one student who's ready to go to be competing under the spring certificate for competition. Okay, mid-year transfer scenarios that we also see quite a bit along with the certification process. A student athlete who played 4 women's basketball games in the fall term plans to transfer to a new NAI institution for the spring term. So this one carries some different levels to it that I want to touch on. Transfer students who essentially were not charged in the previous academic term. As of spring 2023, we had a bylaw amendment that had transfer students can compete immediately without residency unless it's required by the conference. We want to make sure that transfer students who may not have been charged a season of competition under NAI rules at least competed under their EC decision. So they used their EC decision in a contest in the fall, even if it results in not being charged a season of competition. That locks in the student's need to not go back through the eligibility center. So the situational analysis is also included here and is linked below to always have that on hand as you're going through certifying your student athletes to ensure those students who are transferring in who may not have an SOC charge did in fact compete, and so they don't need to get an updated decision. Conditions for immediate competition: the student must be listed on the ECP certificate for the new term. She must be certified as eligible for the spring term, and competition can begin immediately following the fall's end of term, as we just discussed. So something specific to this situation that we're talking about and NAI competition. A student who has played in less than 20%, so again, in basketball, we get this question a lot, less than 7 basketball games, means the student is not charged a season of competition for that fall term. So they will start the window to apply the limits for each 20% is specific to an NAI institution. If the student only competed in 5, that is wiped clean if they transfer to another NAI institution, and then you're looking at the 20% limit to calculate whether a student is going to be charged or not. So at this point in time, in this specific scenario, the student is not charged a season of competition in that first term because it's specific to the NAI institution. They can transfer. They do not need an updated eligibility center decision. You can always double check that, but this is one common example that we get. In the next one, I'll go to a season of competition has been charged in the previous term. So let's say a student athlete plays in 7 or more games in the fall under NAI 20% rule and then transfers to a new NAI school in the spring. Will they be charged with 2 seasons of competition? And this is for anybody who is maybe even coming from the NCAA. We see that the student athlete has been charged a season of competition in the previous term. We have to honor that at face value. And our bylaws dictate that competing at 2 institutions within the same academic year may result in 2 seasons of competition charged, depending on the bylaws situation.
Wait a minute, I can't hear you.
Please remember to mute when you get a chance, please. So I bring this up as we'll get a slew of calls from coaches guaranteed in January, especially the soccer coaches, where this comes as a surprise for some, where soccer players who are charged a season of competition in the fall wish to transfer and compete in the spring. So again, as we covered at the beginning, you're required to certify each academic term, no matter what, even for spring scrimmages. Students who have been charged a season of competition in the fall, that has to be taken at face value and must be certified for the progress rule. And so we see a lot of times where student athletes may not be meeting the progress rule especially if they're just freshmen, and they compete in the fall, they only have the 12 credits and transfer into the spring term, they will not meet the progress rule to compete. And again, even if it's only scrimmages at the time, this is where our bylaws require the specific application to be met. Here are some key articles and links to some things that are supporting this information, and of course our Eligibility Center situational analysis. So I'm going to stop there and open up for questions and anything in the chat box, or please feel free to unmute and share your questions. Might be a good thing if this all makes sense, or is hopefully some might remember. Okay, so can you go back up to the last point about continuing eligibility for soccer? Chris, are we talking about a student athlete who was charged the previous term?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like me to cover this again, or go ahead and ask your question?
No. If you don't mind, cover that again.
Sure. Okay. So for any student athlete who was charged a season of competition for numerous reasons in the fall term, whether it was the NAI school, since our seasons of competition and the frequency of play limits to determine the 20% is based off of each NAI institution. So if a student athlete was charged because they competed in more than 20% in the fall, or we are honoring an NCAA season of competition charge, or even NJCAA, what have you. In that fall term, that's going to stay as in something that we have to recognize. Going into the spring term, as you're certifying for the next NAI institution, so you're certifying at the next school, the students' season of competition will have to stay as a standalone season of competition charged. It cannot roll over into a spring one because this is a different institution. And so the spring certification will have to honor the progress rule for that season of competition charged in the fall.
Perfect. I thought that's what you meant. I took something else away from it the first time, got a little scared. We're good. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. Sometimes I talk too quickly, so I love that you guys can help slow me down and ask the questions. Good deal. Okay, we have a couple more questions coming in here. So Dylan asked, when recertifying for the spring, we will be able to list the first day to competition, even if it's before the first day to class. I know that this was an issue in the fall, and I think I remember seeing it and got resolved, but I wanted to check. Thank you, Dylan. Yes, I think that would be part of the updates for next week. But yes, that's one of the things that we are removing. We also saw a glitch today because those two rules were kind of tied. It says you cannot name the date of the first competition before the start date of class or after the last date of class. And so if a team wants to go ahead and certify, even though their first competition may not be until after fall grades, that weird window, our advice is to go ahead and certify now if student athletes meet all eligibility requirements for the fall, so that you can lock in that 30-day recertification window. So we're talking about that with the tech issue. But yeah, short answer, Dylan, is that we're hoping to get this rectified by the end of December for sure. Okay, in the event the last day of class, oh, how funny. I think this is exactly what I was talking about. I emailed you a little bit about this. This is exactly what I was just talking about. So in the event that the last day of class was December 6th, the first competition is the 8th, certification cannot be made due to conflicting dates. And this is the tech glitch that we're talking about. So the quick override that I offered was to put in your first date of competition is going to be December 5th to get rid of all that tech things that we're having to work with our programmers to eliminate. But in this situation that we are talking about via email, we want to make sure that the first competition is in that kind of gray weird period after the last date of class, but before grades are going to be posted, so you can't move into that spring certification just yet. So in this example here on December 8th, it's good to go ahead and certify all your student athletes now for the fall term to lock in that 30-day recertification period. Any other questions you may have? This information will be posted later today, so share with your friends. Anybody else who has questions about this mid-year, next week at this time, we'll cover the last webinar of the November term here, November month, I should say. And that would be specific ECP tech updates as it pertains to recertification. So thank you guys again. We'll see you next week.